Hello, and welcome to The Road Already Traveled, a podcast where we feature lessons from successful entrepreneurs and the professionals that serve them as they share their inspiring stories and insights. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, I'm Rich Schutte, your host of The Road Already Traveled, where we share lessons from entrepreneurs, like-minded business owners, and the professionals that serve them, providing valuable insight to those listeners that are on the same journey. This episode is brought to you by Avalan, a wealth management firm dedicated to personalized financial, business, and investment planning for entrepreneurs as they make their way in our chaotic world. Are you ready to take control of your financial future? At Avalan, we believe wealth isn't just about numbers. It's about freedom, security, and living life on your terms. Wherever you are in your entrepreneurial journey, our team of experts is here to guide you every step of the way. No cookie-cutter solutions, just smart, personalized strategies designed for your goals. Using our unique Optimal Entrepreneur program and an unwavering focus on world-class service, our relationships are built to last generations, helping clients achieve lifelong goals through a thoughtful, consultative approach. Visit avalanwealth.com today and start building the future you deserve. That's AVALAN wealth.com. So today I have Adam McArthur from Archrock, who I'll tell you now has been a friend of mine for quite some time.
Arch Canyon Partners.
My apologies, Arch Canyon Partners. Good thing that I'm on my game today, huh, Adam?
There you go.
But Adam's been a good friend of mine for some time now. I've seen him in action, referred some business his way, and know that he is a genuine expert in the services that he provides to entrepreneurs. Something that oftentimes we forget as entrepreneurs is that, we're running these businesses. We don't know what they're worth. We don't know what they look like. We don't know how to protect them. And one of the great things that Adam allows us to do is to actually understand what we're sitting on, whether we're looking for different solutions along the way, be it insuring on a buy-sell, getting ready to go to market, or for that matter, even wrap up a marriage. He can come in and tell us what we're worth, what it looks like. Adam is the president of Arch Canyon Partners and leads a team of analysts and oversees all valuation and litigation support for the firm. He has extensive experience in the valuation of closely held corporations, intangible assets, partnerships, and professional practices. Pretty much covers most of our audience. Arch Canyon Partners practice includes both litigated and non-litigated matters. Adam and his team are known for delivering well-reasoned, supportable, and defensible valuations for a wide variety of businesses and entities in many industries and markets. Prior to forming Arch Canyon Partners, Adam was the office manager and head of valuations for the West Coast office of a top 40 accounting firm. Prior to that, he was managing director of a top 10 accounting and professional services firm, where he was responsible for growth and expansion in the firm's Western states valuation practice. I'd say that that's quite a bio, sir. And I'm looking forward to, getting kind of into the meat of the conversation and learning more about what you do and how you can create value for the people that you ultimately serve. Not to mention, when people need to look for what it is that you do. I thought we could kind of kick this off on a personal note. As well as I think I know you, I'm planning on getting to know a little bit more about you today. For example, like, the name of your firm.
That'd be good to know, but that's fine. It's a tricky one.
I don't know where the Archrock came from, but I guess I was already on vacation someplace in Utah. But Arch Canyon it is. Adam, let's start personally. What do most people not know about you? Strange habits, hobbies, quirks?
I've got plenty of quirks, and I think most people who know me for any short period of time learn a couple of those quirks. I think what people sort of don't realize is that, not to toot my own horn, I'm a pretty dedicated father. I spent a lot of time dealing with my kids and my kids' issues, and those have changed and gotten, little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems. So I spent a lot of time dealing with my kids and doing that. I'm an avid scuba diver, which a lot of people don't know. Um, and yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, I can talk to that a little bit. I know you definitely know how to be a fun dad. You've got all sorts of toys and great things you like to do. So boats, motorcycles, whatever it might be.
Yeah, both motorcycle sea-doos, whatever it is. But the other thing that it's changed a little bit too is, so I have twins. They're 20. They're sophomores in college right now, and sort of starting to take on their major classes. And so I spent a lot of time guiding them in terms of what classes are going to take, really what they want to do, and how to focus their life, and then working with them outside of that. Making sure they have the right internships, making sure they're doing what they want to do, making sure they sort of understand the nuances of their life choices a little bit. I've made some mistakes along the road and trying to help keep them from, not, I like them to make their own mistakes to learn, but also keep them from making really big ones too.
Yeah, Lord knows they know how to find them, don't they?
Yeah, they sure do. By the way, so do I.
As I say, especially if they're anything like us,
Yeah,
or,
perfect.
or a listening audience for that matter. Like I said, I've known multiple sides of you, and I know you're a super fun guy, and I know you're an amazing professional. But maybe you'd like to share one of the craziest things you've ever done, just to humanize yourself a little bit more for us.
That's a tough one. I talked earlier about being a scuba diver, but I've been shark diving, and then I've also dove the blue hole, which went down to about 150 feet, pretty darkness in Belize. So I do take a little bit, as much as I like to think I'm an adventure seeker with the motorcycle riding and the boating and stuff. I'm usually pretty mellow in doing that, but sometimes get me in the water and I go a little bit crazy. So going to that, coming back, swimming with the hammerheads and the reef sharks there was an experience.
Yeah, I'm going to chalk that up to crazy for sure. I know I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, so that's probably the craziest thing I've done. That or maybe got married. I don't know. But my wife will object to that answer.
I'd argue that it was the craziest thing she ever did, but I guess that's not there.
Yeah, you're probably not far off there.
Adam, talk a little bit about where you're from, what it was like growing up.
Yeah, so I had a sort of an interesting upbringing. I was born and raised in the San Fernando Valley. My dad was a judge. My mom was a nurse. I'm the youngest of 5 kids. There's a 10-year age gap between me and the next youngest. And so, and they're all a year apart. So rather than being raised by parents, I was sort of raised by this band of roving kids through the neighborhood, sort of the ultimate Gen X upbringing, sort of off on my own, doing what I want, very little supervision, which is a little bit different than how my brothers and sisters grew up, because they all went to Catholic school, a little bit more of a sheltered life, a little bit. And I think they, as a result of that, sort of rebelled a little bit more than I rebelled, even though I had my own sense of rebellion. So it was a little bit different where, my bedtime at night wasn't necessarily the time, my curfew, I should say, wasn't necessarily when my parents told me to be home or when my dad told me to be home. It was when all my friends had to be home, because I just sort of was left to run amok all by myself, which, it's a little bit different than I think most kids are raised.
Yeah, maybe that's part of. We'll talk about this as we go, but something that I didn't mention in your intro is how as we align ourselves with professionals here for our clients, we tend to like to work with other people that I would consider to be entrepreneurs, even if they're in the professional services world, right? In going out and founding your own company, I would suggest, kind of labels you as an entrepreneur, as well as a professional service provider. Of course, with all the background and extensive titles and letters behind your name and certifications and corporate experience, I think that do you think that part of that growing up, and being that rogue kid was maybe part of what lit your entrepreneurial spirit?
Yeah, no, it absolutely did. I think, I'm sort of a problem solver. And I think growing up in that, which I think ties really well to what I do when I'm valuing a business. One of the things I do different than a lot of people is I value a lot of, well, it's not fully in that bio, I value a lot of hard to value assets. So a lot of unique intellectual property, celebrity names and rights and music catalogs and in-process litigation and life insurance policies, things that are sort of outside the box of what you would consider normal business valuations, right? So I do plenty of those, but then I do a lot of the stuff that other people either aren't comfortable with or just don't have the understanding and the wherewithal to really understand where value comes from and how it drives. And I think part of me growing up on my own is I sort of had to fend for myself. So when I started in this career, I was an investment banker out of college, did that for a couple of years. And then I stumbled onto this little firm in Calabasas that did business valuation. And at the time, I didn't even know that that was a career. I worked for, there was 3 partners at the firm, very small. And originally I broke off with one of those partners and we started another firm. So even back then, which was, probably close to, it was right about the time I got married. We've been married about 25 years now. So even back then we broke off, we started our own firm. We built that up to about 20 people. People started looking at us to buy the firm. And at that time, me and my partners didn't necessarily see eye to eye on the future. And I left that firm that, I was pretty instrumental in starting and building up to go work for larger firms, but really for 2 reasons. One, to sort of see how other people did it, because I figured there was a better way or at least a different way. And also at the time, my kids were in, they were very young. They're playing Little League. And so, I'm missing baseball practices on the weekends to go to work, to get stuff done. And going to a bigger firm gave me the opportunity, while I sort of lost some of the entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, I still ran the offices and built those practices while I was there. It gave me a chance to leverage the work and focus on raising my kids and being there as a dad. And then when they got older, it was time for me to sort of break out and do my own thing again, right? When they weren't running up to me for a hug when I walked in the door anymore. And I'm like, okay, I can go out and do my own thing again. And so, but I do think growing up in that environment where I sort of had to fend for myself and do other things sort of helped me in this path of going down the road that not other people who have done what I don't want to take the road already traveled, but sort of the road less traveled in that case, to figure stuff out on my own, to value these things that other people don't. And I think growing up in that environment was helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting to have so many older siblings with such an age gap, but I could definitely see that correlation. As you're growing up, right, as the favorite child, as the youngest, right? As
Yeah,
my youngest,
I don't know about that.
no, my youngest always tells me that that's who she is. So,
Okay.
um, what did you want to do when you grew up? And to follow up to that, who would you consider either situationally or personally like an inspiration or an influence on what?
I mean, other than you? Um, I don't, it's funny, my dad being a judge and my mom also being very educated, they didn't really push education on me as a kid. So the only reason I ended up going to college is because the group of friends that I had in high school all went to college. So when they signed up for the SAT, I signed up for the SAT, right? I was only one of the 5 kids that went to school or that went to college. Then a couple of them did like a trade school or something else, but they weren't as dedicated and focused on school. And not that I was dedicated or focused, but at least that path of going to college and doing that was really geared more from my friend group than it was my upbringing or my parents. But to sort of go back to that, when I went into college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I know I liked cooking. I thought maybe I'd be a chef, but I was worried that chefs didn't make enough money. I always wanted to have a nice car. And so I wasn't really sure. So that's why I went into business and finance and sort of stumbled into that investment banking world and realized relatively quickly that while I liked money, I liked lifestyle better. And so it's one of the reasons I left investment banking, because I wasn't as concerned with the money as much as I was having a little bit more free time and flexibility in my life.
I'd imagine that still provided a good knowledge base, right? That led into what you're doing now and how to work with those types of situations that you're actually valuing, right?
Yeah, it was amazing. It was a great experience. I wouldn't change it for the life, but I just went into it after a couple of years with a different mindset than I think a lot of the people that stumble into that or really desire to be an investment banker. I just sort of stumbled into it and then was lucky to get a job at a big firm at the time that I did and learned a ton, and then realized, I can take this expertise and go somewhere else and live a slightly different lifestyle.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. So, you mentioned you got started, with a little group in Calabasas when you moved out of investment banking. Talk a little bit more about that path that, maybe a little bit more detail on how you went from that, and how you circled back with gathering that information and how that information is now serving you as the principal in Arch Canyon.
Yeah. So, being with a small firm like that was really instrumental. It allowed me to have plenty of flexibility and grow, and you could grow sort of on your own path where you're not with, a larger firm, you sort of got to go through the stepping stones. So I was able to grow quicker, I think, than I would have at a larger firm and be entrepreneurial on my own and build my own practice. And that's something that's a little bit, people talk about like having FU money or an FU card, like something that sort of like lets you go. The one thing that I learned at being at that smaller entrepreneurial firm was my ability to change my path or have my own destiny was the fact that I had my own book of business. And being at a small firm, in order for me to make any money, I really had to develop my own book of business early and develop those relationships, which has served me well, because then when I left there and went to a bigger firm and realized, I don't love the big firm lifestyle anymore, I already had my own book of business. And so I was able to leave and not miss a beat. A lot of people that do what I do, especially at bigger firms, they're sort of what I call catchers. They sit there and all the accountants and other people that work in that firm throw work at them, and they just sit there and they do the work, which is great, but it's just they're stuck in that job or going to work for another big firm. And being with that small firm first and then going to the big firm, I realized that difference. That,
So do you feel like those catchers are just by default potentially more narrow in the scope of how they see the world and how they can go about doing what it is that they do? Do you think that you have a broader sense of experience because of having your own book, because of having that entrepreneurial spirit yourself?
To some extent, yeah. I think part of it, like me having my own book, I guess part of it, let's go back to early on. When I'm trying to build a book, somebody would come to me and say, "Hey, Adam, do you have any experience valuing this?" And I'd be like, "No, but I could do it. I'm sure we could do it. I'm sure I could come up with a way to do it that's supportable and defensible and makes economic sense all the way around." And being at a small firm like that, I had the flexibility to do it. I didn't have to listen to somebody else saying, we don't have the experience to do that. We're not going to take that role, which happens a lot at those firms. So I think for the most part, those people are very pigeonholed in what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see that at those big firms. You have certain people that just do this type of work and certain people that just do this type of work. And I think it's great to have a specialization, because in what we do, there's lots of niche rules. If you're doing what I do for primarily family law, the rules are way backwards from how you do it anywhere else in the world. But being at a firm, like for instance, that smaller firm, one of the partners only did family law. So I learned sort of the nuances of how to do it in family law. And I understand the differences now. Now, I don't specialize in family law, and I prefer not to take family law cases. But when somebody has something that's out of the box, and I don't want to call it extraordinary, but different in family law, that's typically when I get brought in, where they sort of need a hired gun. I'm not doing all the associated forensic accounting and support calculations. They sort of bring me in and say, "Hey, we've got this unique business that nobody else can value correctly. What's the value?" So, but I was able to learn how to do that being at that small firm, and then going to the bigger firm. That's sort of where I noticed those catcher positions.
I like that. Yeah, my next question was to talk a little bit more about the early days of your career, but I think you touched on that pretty solidly, right? With the experience and initially in the smaller Calabasas firm. At that moment, did you? Because obviously, what you do, you're serving high net worth families, high net worth individuals, and when you look at the way money flows and where it comes from, that typically somehow equates to someone who's either a business owner or an entrepreneur, unless you disagree.
No.
Yeah. So was it in those moments that you sort of realized that serving entrepreneurs was a place that you could make a significant impact in what their lives look like?
I don't know. I don't know if I noticed it then that I could make a significant impact. What I will say is, being at that smaller nichier firm, I was able to deal with more unique entrepreneurs. And I will say that the reason I'm still doing what I do today is because I get to work with them. Because I'm going to say most of them are inspiring. Not all of them are inspiring, but you learn that there's so many different businesses and there's so many different ways that people either make money or add value to the world and how they live their life on different terms, which is fascinating. I've seen the way, unbelievable ways people make vast amounts of wealth in things you would never, ever think of.
Mm.
Right. And so working with entrepreneurs, people who sort of have an idea and then they turn that idea into something. And the other thing that you notice with a lot of entrepreneurs is so many of them have failed time and time and time again. Right. And, they're on their sixth bankruptcy and they finally make something to go through, while other ones sort of stumble into this idea and build it in a way that's remarkable. But seeing that adversity and seeing the diversity of I don't want to call it their offerings, but how they make their money and how they see the world, that I find fascinating. And being able to work with entrepreneurs in that regards has helped me immensely.
Yeah.
Because it helps. When I testify in court, a lot of times I'm testifying against somebody who has only done their little boxed work, right? They're an expert. That's all they've ever done. And they're sort of pigeonholed. And they're very square in how they tell a story, because that's sort of the way their mentor told them to tell a story. And they don't really tell the story. They just sort of, they're not animated. They're very black and white. And one of the things that I had early on that I took from that smaller firm is that, my mentors there were, they all had their quirks, right? I wouldn't necessarily call them all mentors, but the people that I worked with, they taught me a lot. And one of the things they taught me is, every valuation is a story, right? There's something behind the numbers. And I'm sure you've seen this with your clients, right? Who have built a company and they think it's worth a ton of money because it generates a lot, but nobody wants to buy it. And then you'll see other companies that hardly make any money, but everybody wants to buy it. Mm-hmm. And so there's a story as to why that is. And so being able to work with these entrepreneurs in such different industries and backgrounds, it's helped me to be able to learn how to tell those stories in a way and understand their stories and be open to them.
So that's fascinating, right? And something you touched on, this kind of goes back to, the entire concept of valuation, when it's not contested and just something that you're trying to figure out, right? I've had countless clients of mine over the years come to me and say, oh my God, we just had someone come out of the blue and offer us $8 million, $20 million, $35 million. This is incredible. But they have no context of whether or not it is incredible or not, because they don't know what they're sitting on. Right. And so I'm sure the part of what you do is help these people, hopefully in many cases, prior to there being a need to know what they're sitting on, to actually understand what it is they're sitting on. So when that out of the blue offer comes, that they understand if it's something that's like, wow, this really is something special, or yeah, they're trying to make me feel good about this big number that could be twice as big, right?
Right. Yeah. And I do. I think that's something I spend a lot of time doing. And the other thing, people will come to me sometimes when they get those offers, and half the time I talk them out of taking it, and then half the time I'm like, take it now, right? Because I think people, I've seen so many businesses fail, and a lot of people make a lot of money for a very short period of time, and there's trends, and it's really having that experience of working with the entrepreneurs, which I think allows me to add value in those circumstances.
And having that front end of the deal knowledge, right, is invaluable at the end of the day, right? Because, when we look at it, for those clients to come to us with those offers, we're not looking at that side of it, right? We're looking at okay, well, here's what you're going to net. This is what it's going to mean to your lifestyle. This means you can stop working, not stop working. What are you going to do next? So we're looking at it on the back end, just in terms of what's left of a deal, but still not really, in that mindset to have the experience to say, yeah, take this or don't, right? So, right. And if there's no message that this episode, spotlights more than any other, it's like it really is the value of understanding what it is as entrepreneurs that we're sitting on, and understanding, when it might be worth, getting off of it.
Yeah.
So professionally, again, I personally know the kind of impact you've had with clients, some of mine in particular, but I also want our listeners to hear about what it is that you do and some of the strategies you use to create a better life for them, right? So perhaps maybe you can share a few examples as stories for those listening to the podcast to be able to learn from? Ideally, you can maybe share a couple of winning examples as well as a couple of, God, I wish they would have listened to me moments.
Yeah. So I've got a couple. So about half of my practice is being done for gift and estate tax purposes. So ultra high net worth people that are subject to the estate tax, whether or not it's at 15 million or 16 million or whatever the current iteration is, they're all impacted in some way or another. And we sort of help them figure out ways to realistically and supportably deal with those tax impacts, dealing with their estate planners and their accountants and their financial advisors to say, hey, you have this asset that may not be cash flowing or liquid now, but it's going to cause a big problem for your heirs. And so we spend a lot of time doing that. And so to give you probably one of my favorite clients ever, the dad who died at in his mid 90s, started a fruit empire which turned into a real estate empire. They probably had a $250 million estate, right? And that was going to be and a lot of it was held in real estate. So they didn't necessarily have taxes to do it. So we were able to get in there and help them sort of restructure some of the entities and do some gifting in advance to help bring that way down. So, when they died, instead of having I think their original estate tax estimate was closer to 100 million. With the help of their attorneys and structuring this deal, when the dad died, it ended up only being closer to 15 or $20 million. And the family, that the son, who was probably 70 or 65 at the time, stood up, had us all in there, brought us in for dinner, showed us the check he was writing to the IRS, thanked us all for helping him, and said, we're unbelievably grateful for the work that my dad did in the planning, and we're happy to write this check because we have a generational wealth that you guys have helped us create and keep. And we're proud of what my dad did, and we're proud of his hard work, and we're going to continue on that legacy. And it was interesting to see somebody so happy to write that big of a check. Sort of their perspective was right. Like, they knew they were saving a lot, but they were happy to pay what they owed and thankful for the opportunity to be able to write that check.
Yeah. It's amazing what good planning can do, right? With good information.
Yeah. And so that was one of my favorite stories, only because, usually you sit down with people when they're writing that check and their mood is very vastly different.
So we understand that, for entrepreneurs that are listening in, that it's going to be something that's imperative, right? Especially if next gen's important to you to do that type of planning, right? To use someone like yourself, as well as qualified estate attorneys and other tax planners. We can see how important that is from a success story. Have you got any where your advice wasn't taken, or that we can learn from?
Yeah, so I've got one going on right now. I've got two. One talking about sort of the need for planning and what happens if you don't plan. We're working with a group of investors who invested in a company, fairly successful company, but they provided all the seed capital, and as time went on, there was an equity shift. So they went from being the majority investors to the minority investors once they got their return and a preferred return back. But with that, they also had the option and the right to buy the business if something were to happen to the primary sort of the entrepreneur that they were backing. And they had backed this person in 3 or 4 different ventures, and he died unexpectedly at 62, without a great estate plan, without one of these cases, which this is much harder and messier to do, where he never finalized his divorce from somebody he was estranged with for, almost a decade. And because of that, the spouse, or the ex-spouse, depending how you look at it, then came in, was able to take control because he never finalized either his divorce or his estate plan to make adjustments for that. And, a relatively healthy person died of a random allergic reaction to something, and now, both the minority investors and the family are involved in, really what I would call unnecessary litigation that's just draining assets out of both sides, fighting over this asset that it could have been avoided with proper planning.
I again, just trying to highlight some of the lessons that I'm hearing from that. the failure to plan, so oftentimes what I've seen, and you can weigh in on this, especially with an entrepreneur or business owner, someone that's been successful, is that we tend to, as a group of people, feel that we're pretty invincible, right? At 62, right?
Yeah.
That there's nothing random that's going to happen, that we're bigger, better, stronger than anyone else. And I'll deal with that, when I'm 85, which is probably still too early, but we'll figure it out then.
Right.
So, I mean, the message that I want our listeners to hear from this is like, it's never too early. We're not invincible. The random things can happen. But have you seen that as a common thread too, that the people that we tend to serve just don't think that that's ever going to happen to them?
Oh, absolutely. I think you see it more with entrepreneurs than you see it in any other aspect. Because they're always looking at the next thing. They're always looking but they're always looking up and forward. They don't a lot of times step back and say, okay, this is what I have. How do I protect this now?
Yep.
And whatever regard that is, how do I plan to make sure that and some of them just may not care. Like, we'll let my family deal with it. But I think if they knew sort of the actual hardships that went on from a lack of planning or the lack of proper planning, I think they would change their mind.
And again, how do you do the planning if you don't know the value of what it is that you're sitting on top of, right?
Exactly.
So, I mean, that was a great story. And then that statement that I just made kind of leads into, tell me why then an entrepreneur truly does need to work with a professional such as yourself to be able to get the most out of the ideas that are being peddled around from the other service providers and professional services people that are surrounding them and advising them. What's your role and how you can make that better?
Well, it's interesting. I think information is key and information is power, right? And any advice that you're getting from, a well-intentioned CPA or financial advisor or estate planner or anybody else, sort of with a guess on what the company is worth, it's really just a guess, like garbage in, garbage out. So a lot of entrepreneurs, depending on what you do, may have a great understanding of what they think the value is, but they don't really know. They may not have taken it to market. They may not, they see things as risks that um, a buyer may not see as a risk. And they see things that aren't risky that buyers probably do see as a risk. And without having that knowledge to sort of say like, okay, these are the strengths, these are the weaknesses, this is sort of what is driving value, this is what's being a value detriment, without being able to see those up front and really understand how all of those lead to value, you're just sort of shooting from the hip, right? Which to some people, that's all they're going to do. Right? You try to get some people to make a plan or spend money on something that they think is sort of, oh, I know what it's worth. But you really don't, unless you've gone through the process, unless you deal with a lot of buyers, unless you really see how the market looks at businesses, you don't really know.
A lot of entrepreneurs are in businesses where they're partners with somebody and then they try to protect those things by buying life insurance, as an example, as a buy-sell mechanism if something happens to one of them. How often have you looked at a situation where that's been needed, where they've actually zoned in on the right number?
Well, so I've been in lots of situations where it's been needed. Zoning in on the right number is a different story. One of the things that I do for a lot of my clients and referral sources is I'll review their buy-sell agreements because the lawyers may read it, the lawyers may understand it, but very often the people that it's meant to protect don't understand it. They have an idea, it's worth this. But really, what does it say and how is value being determined? And what are the pros and the cons of how it's written? Not that there's one perfect way to do it, but I think it's important for people to understand, hey, if this gets triggered, this is why, or this is how it could go bad. I'll give you a perfect example. We had one that was written and it had to do with it was a formulaic clause where rather than hiring somebody to do the valuation, they said, oh, we're just going to put in, a common multiple. And the multiple in this case was like 7 or 8 times earnings. And the earnings were defined fairly loosely. And it was the last 12 months earnings. So whatever it was but in the 12 months prior, and this is one where somebody died. It was a dad and a son who owned the business together. Dad was remarried. son and mother-in-law didn't get along very well. And the agreement said, whatever, I don't remember the exact multiple. I think it was 7 times last year's earnings. It didn't really define last year's earnings very well. And I want to say within 2 months of the death, they had sold a division of the company for, close to $10 million. Just they sold that one division. The company didn't make a ton of money for years. And then all of a sudden it had this very short period. They sold at the right time. They were smart to sell when they did. But because their buy-sell was written so terribly, the son was supposed to pay the mother 7 times what was earnings, and they treated the way the transaction was structured based on the formula clause close to $65 million.
Wow.
And I actually represented the mom in that transaction, and she was actually pretty reasonable about like understanding that. But it just caused so much. I will say of that money that they made, I'm going to say probably half, if not 3/4 of it, went to fighting over that formula.
Wow.
So when we talk about buy-sell agreements, they're great, and I think they're very necessary. But so often people really don't understand what they say.
Yeah, I mean, imagine that on the flip side, right? Where you have a buyout for somebody, you're trying to protect a spouse or your family, and you happen to kick it like right after you had one of your worst years ever.
Right.
And how you've just completely left them out, completely unprotected on the other side of that, right?
Yeah, and a lot of times they're vague on. So let's say, Rich, you've got 3 partners in a business, right? And so you write this buy and sell to sort of protect all of you as partners, and you kick it. And let's not use you an example, but let's say one of these hypothetical partners kicks it, who's got a terrible spouse who now becomes the owner, and sometimes there's not a mechanism for that.
Right.
And sometimes you have to buy them out at a value that you don't really expect to pay them out. Like they very rarely will talk about whether or not you take control discounts, right? Because if you own 25%, it's typically worth less on the open market than it is if you own the whole thing. And sometimes it's the people's intent to pay them out. Like, hey, if we're worth 100 million and you own 25, we want to give you the 25 million. And sometimes they don't. They say, no, it's a minority share. You should be impacted by the diminution in value from that. And not that one is right or wrong, but so many times those agreements, they a lot of times they will specifically state it, but the parties who do it don't understand it. So the business owners don't understand. The lawyers may understand it, and they may not understand what they signed. And so that's one of the reasons I like to get involved in those and just tell people like, hey, if we were to value this based on this is sort of where the number would be. And this is how these clauses impact that value. And then they have an educated basis to say, okay, I agree that like, at least again, knowledge is power. You understand what it says, you understand sort of what will happen if those things unfortunately have to get triggered. And it gives you a sort of a starting point.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I think I heard just about 38 different reasons why someone needs to work with someone like you for sure.
Yeah.
So as you've worked with,
So, money. My kids are still in college, so I need tuition money.
as you've worked with these high achieving type A personalities, such as, you and I and people that we work for, what's been one of your biggest challenges that you've had to overcome, either professionally or personally in those personality deficits or, challenges that may be there?
Yeah, I think, again, as great as entrepreneurs are to work with, sometimes they don't like to take advice and listen. And so that becomes problematic at times when, they ask you for your advice and then they don't listen. It's one thing to not follow my advice, but at least listen to what I'm saying. But that's one of those challenges that I get a lot, where people just, they have it in their mind, they ask me for my opinion and they don't even listen to what my opinion is. I don't care if you sit back and you weigh it and you carefully consider it, is one thing. But that's a big challenge that we'll see, is people just don't listen. They have a preconceived idea in their mind. I'll give you a perfect example. So somebody came to us, they had a very niche sort of boutique style product, and it became very, very popular very, very quickly. They went from probably $15 or $20 million in revenue and maybe making, $700,000-800,000 a year, which is a great living, to $100 million in revenue and $20 million of profit in a very short period of time. And somebody came to them and offered to buy them on a multiple of that. And I said to them, this is not going to last. I've seen 100 companies like yours. I understand when you're sort of a trendy product, there's a reason why you're trendy, because everybody wants it. And then all of a sudden it's sort of, you find it at Kohl's, right? It's just sort of exactly what happened. And so they wouldn't listen to any of their advisors when they had a very solid offer. And they're like, why am I going to sell it for, I think they got an offer of, $120 million. Why am I going to sell it for 120 when I'm making 20 million? And after 5 or 6 years, I'll be worth way more than that. Well, it's not going to last 5 years, guarantee it. They said no. The next year, the next hot thing came around, and they ended up having to file bankruptcy and close because they built too fast and they didn't listen to anybody. Right. And so
it's tough, right? It's like, knowing where that exit is or where you're going to maximize your value it's a tough thing, especially when you're so closely tied to it, right? And your ego is riding that success. I will tell you, the people I work with, that's probably one of my biggest frustrations as well, when you're laying something out that, makes sense and is what needs to be done. And to your point, they don't listen. It's not that it's not like they're like, oh yeah, we got to do that and never get to it. They just don't listen. And then as I get frustrated with that, sometimes I just put my head down and I'm like, wait a minute, I find myself doing the same thing, right? In other aspects of my own personal business, right? So, I understand that it's built in to the DNA of somebody that operates as an entrepreneur. So hopefully there's another lesson here, in this little episode, as far as like, come on guys, we gotta listen. There's people that know more than we do. Great at what we do, right? Arguably that's why we have the successes that we have, but we don't know what we don't know. And there's a lot of people, if we surround ourselves with the right folks, that can help us navigate what we don't know.
Yeah, and the other thing that's, I think, a little bit more unique from like us from the entrepreneurial side, also us as advisors, is that we have hundreds of clients that have done different things. And so we've learned, our entrepreneur clients know what they've done and have their experience. We have a set of knowledge based on all of our other entrepreneurial clients' experiences, both their successes and their failures. And, we can add a lot to the table just in terms of like, hey, this is what I've seen before. Yours could be totally different, but this is sort of the experience that I have. This is my best guess on what's going to happen. We don't know, but this would be my take on what's going to happen, and at least listen and consider the advice. And then, you make your own decisions. But I think a lot of times those people who are entrepreneurial, who see themselves as doers, sort of look back at people that they're going to consider non-entrepreneurial, like somebody like me who's more of an advisor, despite the fact that, I've started a couple companies and I've built them and left them and done them again, that our clients' experiences impact our insight. Mm-hmm. Right. And so we're able to give them some insight from lessons that, they may not have had to have learned the hard way.
Yeah, very, very well said. I didn't hear anywhere in any of your stories that you shared of your journey about what you would consider to be one of your proudest moments in the journey that you've got, like one of those aha moments where you sit back, be it a career highlight, or a big success or something like that. It's really what drives us, right? And it's like, I think it's really imperative that as entrepreneurs, we have the ability to understand proud moments of others, because it gives us perspective around our own. And so I'd love you to share yours.
Yeah. And we're going to, going back to the middle of COVID is when I decided to leave a large accounting firm and start my own practice. And for a long time, I sort of knew I was going to do it. I was just sort of waiting for the right time. And, COVID was a little bit scarier. And I was nervous to do it for lots of reasons. My kids were getting ready to go off to college. Like, cash flow was going to be tight. There's just, you never know what's going to be timing. And at the time I had brought in a fairly sizable client with a really large project that sold their work to a group of investors saying, hey, we're hiring Adam and this firm to do this big project for us. And it had to do with a roll-up of about 20 different businesses that had shared but not equal ownership. So they wanted to do a roll-up into one entity. So I call my contact at the company, who was one of the co-CEOs, and I said, hey, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but I've decided that I'm going to leave and start my own firm. And I know you've went through this whole process. You sent out notices to the investors that, my firm at the time was the right firm. I'm just not going to be able to be part of that. I have plenty of faith in this company and then their ability to do the right job for you. I'm just not going to be part of it. And he said, Adam, I really appreciate that. I think it's fine. He's like, we've actually decided to go in a whole different direction. So we're not even going to go forward with that transaction at all. And I said, okay, great. No harm on, either person's part, but I felt bad. So 35 days later, after my notice expired, and I sent emails out to all my old clients and databases saying, hey, look, we've started Arch Canyon. An hour later, he called me and said, hey, Adam, guess what? We're back on. And the reason he did it is because he really trusted me to do the work. And it was a big job. And he basically said, I'm sure he took some grief from his investors for putting it off for a little bit and switching it, but he really wanted me to be part of it. And I think they trusted me to do it and do a right job. But it made me feel good that he was willing to do that and put his neck on the line on investors. Yeah. It also, from day one, I had, a significant backlog of work, which was great too. But that made me I'm like, okay, all the work that I do, and I tell people that I know what I'm doing, that people actually believe that and trust me and understand that the advice I give is real.
Business relationships are just like any other, right? They're very personal. And, we don't always think about that, especially in the type of work that you and I do. But people aren't buying the firm behind us, right? It could be Adam's very fine valuation service, Arch Rock, or
Arch Rock
Canyon, or I don't know why that is stuck in my head, Arch Canyon, or the big firm. They're not buying that, right? It's like our right. Clients are buying us.
Right. And there are times that they're going to buy that firm, like they're going to buy. But that's not where I add value. Like if you need to have a big four do it just because you want the name, you don't really care about the output. You just care that you have a cookie cutter approach and you check the box. And that's fine. Like those aren't the clients that I want. I want the clients that really see value in what we're doing and really want somebody to tell their story or help them understand their story.
The personal relationship, I think, and the meaningfulness of it just gets lost in translation sometimes. We either take it for granted or don't understand how valuable it is to the people that we serve. But it's everything, right? Because competence, there's competence in the big firms, there's competence in the small firms, just like there's incompetence in both of them as well. And, the individual and the personal relationship is really invaluable. I love that story. Thank you. What about mentors? Have there been any along the way? And was there any amazing advice, nuggets that you could share with the audience, that maybe you drew from one or two of them?
I think there's two. And while I wouldn't necessarily consider these people to be like mentors, but I learned a lot from them. One of them was the ability to have your FU card and build your book of business and know that that's your security. And the other one was really somebody really teaching me that there's, I have it trademarked and it's on my website and stuff, the art and science of valuation. That there is an art to what we do.
Yes.
There is an art to understanding that. And there is an art to really figuring out, okay, this is what drives value and this is what not drives value. And the person that sort of told me like, hey, each one of these things that you do is a story. Whether or not you're telling it to the IRS or you're telling it to a judge or you're telling it to an investor, you need to understand what's behind the numbers, right? That drives the numbers and what drives the company and what drives perspective of the company. You need to be able to understand that and tell people values. It's, people talk a little bit about AI changing the industry, and while it for sure is going to change a lot of what we do, I don't know if it's ever going to capture that. If it's ever going to be able to say, you know what, I've been doing this for 35 years. This is sort of a nuanced thing that is not. I mean, if you had a dry cleaner, like a regular, what I call a main street business, it could come in there and you throw your financials in there, it could spit out a number that's probably going to be pretty right. But how's it going to do that with, let's take a restaurant for an example, right? There's Main Street restaurants and there's restaurants that just sort of have that cachet. They've got something else in there, right? They've got longevity. Like how do you capture the nuance of that in sort of this driven model that I think we're moving to. So I think when we talk about what I learned from that mentor, it's really is that there's something behind it outside of the numbers that you really have to understand.
Yeah. Yeah. Very well said. You have any daily rituals that you find important, or are you just kind of a get up and go at it guy?
No. So I struggle back and forth. I do ice bath. I try to do it not every day, but I do it 4 days a week on average. I do that and I do my red light. And then I try to find some time during the day just to sort of sit and reflect, sort of digest the nonsense of phone calls and emails and spreadsheets and everything else, just sort of let some of that go. So I try to spend, I don't want to call it a meditation because it's really not a meditation. It's really more of an unwinding, just sort of reprocessing that stuff that I have to deal with and then refocusing on what's right.
I love the ice bath because we all want our financial professionals to have ice running through their veins, right?
Oh yeah, I'm telling you, it's the worst thing ever. But if you get in that, I get up at usually about 5:30 or 6 every day, and to start your day like that, I mean, it makes most other challenges you're going to face that day pretty light.
Yeah, no doubt. So I think we're getting to a point of closure. I had one last question that I wanted to ask, but I do want to take the opportunity to point people to your website at www.archcanyonpartners.com. That's archcanyonpartners.com. So if there's something that you found interesting here or want to try and find Adam and for something you might need, that's a great place to find him. So the last
I do think I'm going to go by archrock.com just to make sure that people don't fall off that train.
Yeah, seriously, you might want to go get it because I have misled them several times through this journey. But that is archcanyonpartners.com, canyonpartners.com. And
or just Arch Canyon too. You can go to www.archcanyon.com.
Okay, right on.
Both work.
Both work. I love that. Lots of ways to find you. So my last question is, at the end of the day, right, when you're either hanging it up professionally or getting ready to draw your last breath, what do you want to be remembered for?
I'd like to say my sense of humor. I'd like to say my whiskey collection, which hopefully, if it's my last breath, if there's none left. But I'd like to say it was that, I value friendships and personal relationships and people knowing that if they need something, they could call me and they know that I'm there for my friends. Like that's one thing that I really pride myself on is trying to be there at difficult times for people, or just be there if you need to move a refrigerator. Right? I try to be there for those people, and that's what I'd like to be remembered by.
Love that. It's a great spot to close. Let's call this one a wrap. Again, we've been talking to Adam McArthur, who is your go-to professional in valuation and litigation support services. And once again, he's from Arch Canyon Partners.
Awesome. Thanks, Rich. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your graciousness and giving us your time. And hopefully there's some lessons here that we can all learn from. And again, it was great having you. So Great. We'll see all of you here next time on the road I already traveled. Thanks for tuning in and have a great day.
As always, thanks for joining us on the Road Already Traveled podcast. We're grateful you've joined our community and look forward to seeing you again for our next installment. So be sure to click subscribe so you won't miss a thing. This communication is for informational purposes only and does not purport to be a complete statement of all material facts related to any company, industry, or security mentioned. This material is limited to the dissemination of general information pertaining to its diversified services. The opinions expressed reflect our judgment now and are subject to change without notice and may or may not be updated. The information provided, while not guaranteed as to accuracy or completeness, has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable. Financial planning, advisory, and/or consulting services offered through Avalan LLC, a registered investment advisor. Prospects or clients who take advantage of any free consultations or services are under no obligation to hire Avalan LLC as their investment advisor. Listeners who are not market professionals or institutional clients of Avalan LLC should seek the advice of their financial advisor before making any investment decisions based on this communication. Additional information on any securities mentioned is available on request.